Hello, everyone. My name is Sabih Ahmed. I'm the Associate Director and Curator of the Ishara Art Foundation, and I am absolutely delighted to welcome all of you attending today the first virtual tour that also captures the first transformation of our newly opened exhibition titled Growing Like a Tree, Static in the Air. For those of you who might have already followed our Instagram posts, our websites, and our announcements, Growing Like a Tree, Static in the Air is the second iteration of Sohrab Hura's debut curation, which was titled Growing Like a Tree. And Growing Like a Tree opened in January this year, and it ran until the 1st of August. It had artists from various parts of the world brought together by Sohrab based on his collective journeys, his friendships. And while the first iteration of the exhibition had 14 artists officially stated, it actually had so many more voices because of what he calls a map of interconnectedness that he drew for the exhibition that was presented at the opening wall text. As we move into the second iteration that opens today, and it is titled Static in the Air, the analogy for this exhibition, the analogy for this exhibition title actually is inspired from tuning into sonic frequency. How does one navigate through echolocation? How does one switch radio stations? And in the switching or turning of that knob to search for other radio stations that surround us, we also encounter static, we encounter interruptions, we encounter peaks of sounds, we encounter a lot of abstract noise as well until we start catching signals that we want to spend more time with. So in a way, the exhibition is also about learning to stay with static, static in the air, static on radio stations, static signals, static electricity. The exhibition in its second iteration brings together some of the artists that linger on from the previous iteration, but also new artists that have been added into this one. The way we've been referring to all of these additions, peaks, clusters have been almost through a sonic language as well, or which even between our discussions as Sohrab, myself, my colleagues, and some of the artists we were discussing, where an artist fades out in the second iteration, or another artist fades in. An artist suddenly occupies the whole space because of the sonic element of their work. Another artist expands or grows, kind of like mushrooms sprawling in the space of the exhibition. So those are some of the kinds of analogies that were informing the way this exhibition was curated. And as you'll notice when you look at the website, when you spend time in the exhibition, it is really an exhibition that is occupying the entire year at the Ishara Art Foundation. And it's slowly transforming. It's looking at the exhibition as a dynamic, agile, continuous process. It's in a way thinking about being present, where the present is present continuous in my view, not present as one small moment separated from the past and the future. At Ishara Foundation, some of these ideas are very important to us because a space that is dedicated to contemporary art from South Asia and South Asian diaspora, we try to complicate these regional formations, complicate the histories of these geographies, especially because the place we at Ishara are located, which is in the Gulf, in the UAE, where you get to see so many geographies, so many identities, so many languages flow in and out of this place at rather high speed. And this is something that I think this exhibition felt extremely valuable for, that when the pandemic started a year ago, and there was a kind of sense of immobilization where where you feel restricted and can't move, can't travel, and some people have to by force move and go back to whatever might be home for them. This exhibition was looking at some of those mobilizations, some of those movements, not just thematically, but just kind of referring to them as processes in which how do bonds get formed? How do connections get made? How do connections stay resilient, even if those connections are fragile? So on that note, let me quickly introduce you to the four speakers we have today and my fellow colleague, Sohrab, if I may call him that, who has curated this exhibition. Sohrab is based in New Delhi. He's a photographer and filmmaker. You can read his bio in more detail on the Ishara website or on his website. This is his first curation, as I mentioned, and as a curatorial project, it was daunting because, as one knows, curation can take on any kind of form, and in this case, Sohrab really made it his own. Sohrab will be taking us through a tour of the show, and we are also, excuse me, Goodman, please come. Um, Sohrab will be taking us through the show, and we're accompanied by four of the artists from the previous and the current iteration. Zainab, who is based in Kashmir at the moment in Delhi and sitting next to Sohrab. Farah Mulla, who is in Mumbai, if I'm not wrong. Jaisingh and Sathish, both of them at the moment in the south of India, all of whom are present in this exhibition in various ways. So on that note, welcome again, and we will take this forward with the tour and a conversation with these artists. Sohrab, you want to take over?
Yeah, hesitatingly, I will take it over.
All right. I'm going to go behind the camera.
Thank you for coming over, and thanks to Zainab and Farah and Jaisingh and Satish. When I was asked to, I think in a strange way, this this second iteration was something that Sabih and I and Laura, who used to work at Ishara, we all had kind of envisioned when we were, um, you know, we've come sort of getting more familiar with the first iteration, because I think we recognized that what was existing at Ishara at that time was a passing through of sorts. We recognized that this sort of coming together was already in flux, and what we were doing was that we were just in a way marking this very moment, in that larger movement of interconnections and different meanings being generated. And strangely, because of the pandemic, we were able to make the second iteration come to life. I think today's walkthrough is centered around clusters, because when we were trying to build the show, echolocation was a big sort of method, or echolocation was the way we kind of wanted to envision our own movement in the space. How do we get drawn towards? How do we get pushed back from? And so the corners became really important to us, because that was a sort of concentration for us. So if you go around the show, you see different corners have different sort of pulls and pushes that are at place. Um, the artists who we have today are in this particular corner with Satish on the right, and you have Farah's work, Oral Mirror, you have Satish's work, Town Boy. We have Zainab coming in this iteration with a lovely work from Srinagar, from a home. And Jaisingh, only for today, has faded out. And the work that existed over here in the first iteration has become a notation. So in the first iteration, um, the structure of the exhibition was in the artworks, in the notations, and also citations, and which was Dayanita Singh was a citation in that show, because I think many people in the show have had connections to her, and this was a book that wasn't meant to be opened, so we were just looking at the word "sent a letter to a friend," which was to give a tone, and in a way to have this extra layer in terms of how people make works, in terms of support, and in terms of these other connections that we don't see. So to cut it short, I imagine that very often, I mean, I don't know if the rest of the people can connect with me here who are with us on the panel, but I always felt that as someone making work myself, my work was always a residue of something much bigger, many more experiences, much larger part of the process. But somehow the work that one sees is only a partial glimpse of what goes into it. So the notations were to, and the citations were to, in a way, open up all the works that you see in the medium level, you know. Those were the kind of thoughts that were kind of coming in when we were structuring the show in the first iteration. And when we started talking about the second show, um, the one thing that was clear was that we didn't want the second iteration to be separate from the first. We wanted some sort of continuity where one could actually go from the first to the second, which is why this 6 days of transformation were important, because we wanted to not go from iteration one to iteration two in a blink of a second, but more, in these much slower movements. So, which is why, along with clusters, now we have this notion of peaks that started to kind of form in our minds, because we felt like change is always happening slowly. Sometimes, you know, the, the peaks that are bigger than others, sometimes the troughs are deeper than, like maybe the second day's peak will be much smaller than the first day. Maybe the third day's peak will be much more amplified. And we wanted someone who is actually experiencing every day of this transformation to, in a way, experience, those peaks. Sometimes those peaks will be visual. Sometimes those peaks will be sonic. Sometimes those peaks might be far more spatial, which is off the walls as well. So, a lot of these sort of works that you're seeing right now are from the first iteration. Maybe in the next few days, you might see certain changes in these places. You might see the same work, but in a different context with different spillovers that are happening from other works. So that's the idea of, you know, um, the next few days that we had in mind, which we would like all of you to experience. We can actually go straight to this corner simply because um, we were imagining that every day there would be a different landscape. And in our landscape today, this corner is the one that is having the biggest shift, where Zainab's work comes in, where, she's been working since the lockdown, which was started with the siege in August in 2019 in Kashmir, when it's been a much longer lockdown over there than what the rest of the world has been experiencing. And Zainab's been working at home. The garden becomes a very important space. There was a certain connection that we found with Jaisingh, because Jaisingh began with talking about isolation, where it was the isolation that took him back um, to his home, where he started to kind of confront a certain history, and he started making a work that was a tribute to his grandmother. And a lot of the works here are connected to isolation, but in different contexts. Um, Farah, her work Oral Mirror, which had a lot to do with looking inwards. A lot of the people here in the exhibition have been looking inwards. Satish's work Town Boy, just by the title, Satish was very sort of, he was locating himself, because he was also very aware that he was, coming from a small town to a metropolitan city like Chennai. And the work was a lot about perspective. And similarly, you had Jaisingh, who was looking at his own history. You had Zainab looking at her own home. But at the same time, all of them are connecting to the much larger society. So it's not only sort of situated at home. And Jaisingh still has these older notations that exist, but at the same time, some of Sabih, if you can take the camera back to Zainab's work, to the right part, where Jaisingh's older notation is still there, where he began with photographing, the Narmada Valley many years ago, photographing a community outside that was going through displacement. And then Jaisingh's small notation has also moved closer to Sean's. So there are these smaller shifts as well that are happening in the show. So if you come to experience the show, you're going to actually see the shifts happening not only in the middle plane, and you can see also these smaller sort of shifts that are happening. Maybe we got a message from Pantik Nayak. Maybe the screen is locked. I'm not sure. I think.
Oh, I see. Is it showing for you, Saurabh?
We need to pin your.
I have pinned it. Is it not pinned?
No, it wasn't working. Sorry about that.
Yes, apologies, everyone.
Screen
I'm
around.
going to switch off the camera for a bit and then try and pin it again. Maybe you can just continue speaking a bit and I'll be back.
But I hope it's not a complaint that you can only see Sohrab and Zainab. There are a lot of people. But yeah, so that was the idea, in changing. Oh, it keeps going back to me when I speak. I'm so sorry about this.
Okay, so I think it's not us. It's just that your settings are at gallery view. So whosoever is speaking, the screen is taking up the whole space. So if you go to the top right corner, there is the view mode. You can change it to the media view.
Can I request if the other participants can switch their cameras off?
Yeah, maybe we can just switch it off.
And
Swani said that we have to spotlight your sort of view. So,
got it.
So I'm taking this off so that we can actually. So Sabih, why don't you put your screen? All of us have our screens off now.
Okay. Everyone attending, can you please confirm whether you can now see?
Okay, great.
Okay, excellent, excellent. And Sohrab, are you now when you speak, are you still visible, or we just have the gallery view, right?
Yeah. So it's fine.
Okay.
It's actually better. So
okay.
So the thing is that the change is more staggered, which is going to happen. We are slowing down so that one can actually see every day different sort of connections being made. Right now, for example, Jaisingh is faded away, and we still have some of his notations. We have his main work from last time, which was
I'm sorry to interrupt. It seems there's still a problem. 1 minute.
I mean, if some of the listeners can pin Sabih's screen, I'm sorry to ask you to do that, but if that's possible, maybe that's what's going to remain. Oh.
Sohrab, can you speak?
I'm speaking. Can you?
Tanvi, is this? Can you see the video now?
Is it working? And
Tanvi,
fine.
can everyone see?
Sabih speaks. That's the thing. I think it's. I think Sabih, do you know how to spotlight your?
I have spotlit it, so I'm not sure why it is not.
Sabih, you know exactly what we are what I'm talking about, how about you take over so that we don't lose time? Maybe you
Okay.
can go for today and I can do this tomorrow onwards, just so
Mhm.
that people are able
Okay.
to question properly.
Okay. What about now, everyone? Just to be sure.
I mean,
Yes. Okay. Great. Okay. It's working now. Got a yes from Tanvi. Very sorry, everyone. Let's quickly go back to the exhibition. I put it on white now, and we are back in the show. I will be grateful if someone can please quickly confirm.
yeah, it's on
Yeah.
you, but I think
Yes.
it doesn't go back to me. You know?
I've pinned it. I've spotlit it. So when you speak, Sohrab.
Yeah, so like today, we'll be looking at the corner where Zainab, Satish, Jaisingh, and Farah are, and we're going to be inviting them to kind of open up their works beyond what's there in the exhibition. Also ended up happening in the layout here, which actually we hadn't expected, was that Zainab's work kind of fit right on top of my family archives, where I was also looking at home. And in a way, Zainab is also, creating her own sort of family album. So the idea is to kind of have many of these parallels running, which are not constant. Because I think that very often, as someone making work, I felt that exhibitions were always fixed and constant, whereas um, um, actually the possibilities are way more, fluid.
Oh, Sohrab, I'm sorry. It
Just
seems every time you speak. Okay, let me quickly walk through, and then we can go back to a seminar. Yeah, a webinar. Sorry. Is that okay? We do a quick kind of scan of the exhibition for everyone to get a sense. So what Saurabh spoke about, and I'm not obviously going to try and paraphrase, is that the exhibition is going through a series of transformation. And it's also defying the logic of the exhibition as a static form and something that is changing, transforming, transitioning. And so over the course of this year, we're actually seeing one long exhibition transforming into another iteration. And these iterations then may even continue beyond this. And this becomes quite special to us, especially because in a moment like this, when the present is experienced as something that is continuously ongoing, as opposed to something that can be cut off from the past to the future, as I mentioned earlier. What you're seeing in front of me right now is actually a cluster formed by a work that has just recently come into this exhibition by Zainab. It is titled The Weight of Snow on Her Chest, that she's been making since the pandemic. Below that, on the bottom left, you see a set of notations by Sohrab, or family pictures of his own, from his time of being a child all the way to growing up till he started boxing and decided to switch careers and not remain a boxer and become a photographer. A story you'll also find on his website. On the top left, you see a work by Jaisingh that actually, in fact, occupied this space as a set of prints that have text on them that share anecdotes around his starting from his grandmother and how she was an inspiration back in his youth and as he continued to grow up, and also about social concerns with regard to how society treats one another. And the question of caste obviously has been very important in many works in this exhibition: caste, gender, regional identities, universal identities, language, politics. And all of these come in subtle ways because of how stories are communicated, whether they be personal or they be collective, and all of those having political dimensions. What you're seeing in front of me right now is a work by Farah. This work is a 3-channel input kind of install, which takes in high frequency sounds and emits them back. Now, this almost produces a kind of pull in this corner of the exhibition, because the other corner is a project by the Nepal Picture Library, which is kind of like an archival project around feminist history, around 2 women who've been very active in Nepal since the 60s all the way into the 90s and sharing their stories. So you have one kind of a cluster or accretion forming on this side that has its own connections throughout the exhibition. And then on the other side, other corner, you have the work by Farah. Farah's work is bracketed right now by Zainab, Jaisingh, Sohrab notations, a tiny notation by Jaisingh over there, and Sathish's work, Town Walk. And these are the artists we have with us today. And what we want to discuss is really clusters, because something that Sohrab and I have been discussing, and some of those conversations seem to have carried over with artists as well, which is that we're probably living in a moment where we're experiencing things not as a singular image, but we're experiencing images through clusters, through accretions, through flows. And that maybe this is something that is telling of our present moment. And we wanted to unpack this process of clustering, layering, accretions, and flows through the processes and stories that Farah, Jaisingh, Zainab, and Satish might like to share today. So I'm not going to give you a full exhibition run through, but at least to give you a sense, I'm doing a quick round. And over the course of the next 5 days, you can see on our website how various concepts, various processes that inform this exhibition will be discussed with different artists. Work by Sarkar Pratik, Minim Wasif, and Katrin in the corner. Now, all of these, as you can see, shed light on one another. They don't shadow one another. They, in fact, illuminate each other. And that's something that was quite interesting for us in this semi-dark space that is lit from outside. We will see more of these transitions happening in the coming days. I won't give away too much, but just to give you a quick idea, a citation by Rux Media Collective is going to come into this space, and a work by Rahi Punyashloka is also going to come into this space, which will create a very different dynamic, a very different circulation of light, images, and narratives. So on that note, I'm going to now switch my camera off. Everyone else can switch their cameras on, and we're going to have more of a conversation. I hope that sort of sums it up all right, Sohrab.
Yes. In fact, I think one thing that stayed with us was something that Rux, I think, had talked about, if I'm not mistaken, in their own method of exhibition making, which was about pulling out of seaweed, where you're not just pulling out, one seaweed, but you're pulling out an entire cluster of seaweed every time. And that's something that we wanted also to be part of this, exhibition, which was when you're pulling one thread out of this exhibition, along with that, you're pulling out, various other sort of strings. It's an entire ball that you're pulling out. So, which is where this idea of clusters came from, which wasn't just about us stepping into these clusters that are already there, but also what are the different connections and threads that we are pulling out of this exhibition. Yeah.
So we wanted to now switch over to actually hearing from the artists, so that you don't only have to hear me and Sohrab speak. And we're very lucky to have 4 of them present today that actually form one cluster in the show. As Sohrab mentioned, that analogy of seaweeds, if anyone knows Hindi and Urdu, it's like a guchha, a whole bundle coming out. You try. And so how does one talk about an exhibition where one is not talking about an inventory of artists, but actually an itinerary of artists? And that was something that Sohrab and I constantly talked about. How can an exhibition be shaped not like a group show of an artist list, but rather a curated exhibition with various itineraries crossing into one another? And so the seaweed analogy that Rux had made many years ago about curating, how to curate where you try and pull out one work and a whole guchha, a whole bundle come out. And so we are kind of talking about those guchhas, bundles, entanglements, clusters. And both from the curatorial perspective of how the exhibition has somewhat been structured around these clusters, and a dispersal of some of those clusters, but also in some of the artists who form those clusters in the show, such as Farah, who works a lot with heightened senses, if I'm not wrong. And these heightened senses obviously have no borders. You're listening to something, but you're visualizing something along with it. You're seeing something, but you're smelling or sensing something through heat or temperatures. And that's, I think, what, in a way, I want to ask Farah to speak about, that how does layering work in your practice, Farah? How do you work with mediums and the way you join them, cluster them together? So maybe you could tell a little bit about how you think about clusters, layers, and also speak about it in relation to your work, your process of making artworks, including perhaps the work that is in this exhibition, if you'd like.
Well, thank you for having me over again. When we're talking about sound, we're already speaking about clusters and multiple accretions and multiple senses engaging. So it's essentially the manner in which we're all navigating our daily lives. It's just like my work just tries to bring your attention towards this, trying to be a little bit more self-aware of where our senses are pulling us, rather subconsciously, not like voluntarily. Sonic events are notational in their character inherently, but they also they also exist within the same space. They're like static in the air. You're just choosing which frequency you're tuning into. You're just guiding your attention where it's going. In a similar manner, like, that's what my practice is about. It's just choosing to listen, choosing to feel, choosing to think about things, or navigating. Echolocation was once again, something that we spoke about in the first iteration. Like, how do we navigate space, which is primarily sound, which is existing both in time, which is durational, and space. So I think all of these, like, listening, also like how the second iteration, static in the air, is coming across. It's like a timeless continuum where some works are emerging and while some others are diffusing. So it's all like growing together, actually. It's not like isolating individual practices. It's not a group show. This is something else. It definitely is, where each artist and their work is growing, literally growing like a tree.
Thank you, Farah. Could you add a little bit about what we're experiencing in this exhibition with your work? What exactly is going on here? What went into the making of it? Because it's a complex technical work. It's got 3-channel input, 2-channel output. There's a mirror effect happening, but also a delayed mirror effect. So what exactly is this work about? What is it doing?
So this whole experiment, all my works are called experiments and not artworks. This whole experiment came across in a dressing room, in a shop, actually. When you see two mirrors facing each other, you see the image sort of diffuse into tiny little particles, reflections. I wanted to try the same thing when it came with sound. And what happens when we listen inwards, when we're listening from the sonorous room, because your sense of listening develops as early as a 3-month-old fetus, and it's the last sense to die out when you pass away. So essentially, from the beginning to the end, you're always immersed in sound. And you're always navigating spaces within these sort of evental sonic clusters that, notate our time here. So, and we have eyelids and we don't have eyelids. So we're essentially just immersed in this constant transition, this sort of flux, timeless flux that's been going around. So what's going on when you enter the installation is it picks up the sound waves of your footsteps, your voice when you're communicating, and it picks it up and it sort of plays it back into the same space. So it makes you really aware of your movement, like the sort of immediacy, that little time delay that you notice, sort of really puts the listener in a position where they're aware of their movements, coming back to echolocation within the space. And also, it also brings you back to this question of who's listening. Like I speak, therefore I am, but there's this moment where you stop and you confront that situation where you're wondering, like, okay, I'm the one that's a listener. The listener over here is a deaf device, which is just playing it around in a loop. This is not a recorder, it's just a microphone. So it makes you the listener again. So it's a way to just keep on reflecting upon your own presence within the space.
Thank you. Sohrab, do you want to come in on maybe the next question?
I've been with Zainab, so maybe I'll put her in the spotlight now. And you've been
already been in the spotlight because of technical issues.
Yeah. The thing is that we were talking about waiting because her work is made at a time of a very long wait, much longer than the wait that the rest of the world kind of experienced. But at the same time, there's been this element of waiting that's not really visible on the surface of the images. So, what is waiting for you in the work, and also this is one. You're also working in the press, and it has a very different pace of working, and it has a very different outlet in that sense. So how do you, what's your experience been in, making this work that has a very different tone, very different speed, and also a very different element of waiting beyond what we can see in the work?
Yeah, so for me to pick it up from the speed, it's like when you're working in the press, everything is happening very quick. There is like pressure of piling things and everything. So no matter how traumatizing the events are in Kashmir with respect to the militarization, everything has to happen very instantly. And for me to come back to home and go back to like my ideal way of documenting things very slowly, of how it's back in home, in my own, it's kind of very different. And also to slow it down, there is this. For example, I was talking to Sohrab about how we have these military operations that happen in Kashmir, in which the residential houses where militants usually are, where they stay up, these houses are blasted. And suddenly it's like the family wakes up in the morning and they don't have a house. So for me to look at that work that I do there with the, can we play those?
Yeah, we can share the screen.
Yeah, so I'll be just to add some visual context to it. I'll be showing you some of the photos which are from the houses that actually get blasted during the military operations in Kashmir. And how then like to look at though I'm a photographer, but I'm also living the same conflict that the other people in Kashmir are living. And for me to look at those houses being reduced to rubble, and then to come back to my house and look at the objects that are lying around in my house is kind of very, it's overwhelming. And it's also like there's always this threat that, am I also waiting for something like this to happen to my house? Because it's very, unpredictable. You never know. It may happen, it may not happen. You don't know how long you're going to be safe in that own privileged space that you have. So, yeah, so this is one of the image.
Minimize this.
We start sharing.
It is sharing.
Yeah. Can you see the image? Can someone confirm?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is of one of the houses in Kashmir which had been blasted after the encounter. So these are just rice grains in Kashmir. So there is this thing that we store a lot of food because there are these long sieges that happen in Kashmir. Like because of lockdown, we saw that there was a shortage of foods. There was a lot of people were hoarding because there was a lot of panic. So in Kashmir, it's just habitual for everyone, for every house to store things because they know that anything can happen anytime and then it can turn into an elongated shutdown. So this was the grain that they had stored in their attic, but it was all burned down and mixed with the coal and everything that was kind of set on fire. So yeah, there's that, and then there's this image of the house, which is again from an encounter site, which happened in early May, I think, in early April, I think. So again, it's like just 2 days before the family was living inside the house, and for me to get into this house, to look at the things that are like the way we decorate our kitchens in Kashmir, for me to get into this kitchen and then to go back to my home and to get into that kitchen, to look at like things that how longer is everything going to be in its place. So there is always that sense of it, and then the waiting for all of it to end, for it to kind of for things to get better, for things to stop. There is also fatigue because you're kind of we are in a situation where even the waiting kind of becomes exhausting for you. You don't want for the event to you don't want things to even end anymore, and you just want to kind of you just want to stop in that moment, and you just want something to stay static. But there is no static in Kashmir because there are a lot of dynamics with whatever happens. And for me then to look at my own home and then try to kind of make sense of everything that happens is just what it is about.
I mean, also because you've talked about the kitchen so much, somehow in the Kashmir syllabus there is this article about the kitchen being a space for conversations, and in a way it seems that the kitchen is more than just a place to cook and eat, but it's also a space of inviting someone in for a conversation. And it's also a bit strange to see the kitchen being the space in these encounter spaces, which also kind of get destroyed immediately, because it's also sort of a lifeline for the people living there, but also it's a space for other lives sort of coming in, and um, so yeah. And if I could also invite Jaisingh to kind of maybe because Jaisingh, you started with photographs, and I think that there's a burden of images that we have. Like as a photographer, we have to make images, photographs, whereas in the first iteration of the exhibition, your text became the image. It kind of was in the foreground, whereas the images went into the background. And now you also started to work on a film. So I'm interested in your larger process in terms of how you have to tell one story. You're looking at so many different points of entry, not just in terms of the idea, but also the form, because I think that it also ushers us in a very different way to engage with what you're trying to talk about. So we have your film trailer, which we can also maybe share after you've spoken a bit with whoever is listening. But if you could talk about what your experience has been to work with these different, what text means now as opposed to what a moving form means to you. Also because you have a history of having worked in the film industry as a still photographer, but now you are yourself making the film.
Hi everyone, and thanks for having me here. Yeah, it's like I've been my childhood, like I've been hearing my all my every night my grandmother used to tell a lot of stories. So I growing up with listening stories in the night. So from the childhood, also I was like not my parents and my grandmother was a teacher, but I was learning disability, so I can't be able to study. So most of my learning process, like seeing things, going with my grandmother, grandfather, and my uncles, and we have a farm. So these are the things I seen things, I listened I listen, and so many stories I have listened when my childhood. All my works like in Narmada work and my feel like a fish and everything. There's a question like who I am, and then I'm trying to find answer for the question. Also, that accumulation of like a childhood accumulation, even the social accumulation. Also, being a teacher, son, I'm not able to study. So these are the pain and accumulation made me to tell the story like a photographer and things. Then later, recently, this lockdown, I realized that one day I was went to river. I was walking on the river. I down by the river. I walking. I was sat in the river. Then like I was thinking about that river. Then like nobody taught me swimming. Because swimming is swimming like this water river is going like a flow river. It's you want to learn swimming, you have to be static, like well or maybe swimming pool. But flowing river is very hard to learn swimming. So nobody taught me. So I go jump. I look at my villagers, maybe my father, my brother. I learn by myself. Then same I learn photography also, learn by myself. Then the story I want to tell that then I thought about I want to that story about my childhood memories and things. I thought photography or photo stories not limited in me, so I want to make a film. Then I thought about it I want to learn myself, how like going with the flow. So I start writing that. So before the script myself, so I want to really test myself. So I was working on about my Chandru sir. He's my art teacher and he's a renowned artist in South India. So he's so I tried to make a film also. I want to test my skill as a photographer to moving image and put the image. And so these are the testing myself. Also try to uh, push my boundaries, other medium, so these are the experiment I'm doing that. And this lockdown really helped me in many ways. And looking at myself, I've been away from home for last 15 years. Then this lockdown pushed me, I be at home. Then I look at people are like during that lockdown, people are all in throughout India, people are migrating, like walking. Then my grandmother told me that when they was young, they also moved like that. They was village migrated like that. So then I want to really go to do the photo story about them, but during the lockdown, I can't go away. Then I realized that look at what happening in my being a photographer. Why I'm not telling my own story? That's how I started. Looking at myself and being a photographer. No need to always go outside. Like no need to go to Kumbh Mela. No need to go to outside of the village. So there are a lot of stories. And being like my grandmother's story is very positive, and she has a positive side. So being a grandson, I want to tell the positive story about my family, my own history.
Jaisingh, can you say a little bit about I Feel Like a Fish, the work that is presented in the exhibition, how it came about? And I believe you've been doing it for some time. So
yeah, when I talk about it, like it's really difficult for me to get very emotional, but I try to tell that because it's last week also we have in the school we have we have some a wakil notice came. Then it's very every day it's difficult to being being vulnerable and stuff. So it's really hard to talk about. Yeah, so even though in the words I wrote about that, I used to tell my father used to tell I want to we sell the land and we go somewhere else. So my father told me that wherever he goes, like a shadow, the caste problem will come to you, follow. So you have to face it. Our grandmother, like my father's mother, and her lifestyle, like her message is I've stood and you have to fight, and you have to leave. You can't keep your runaway. You have to go you have always moving around. You have so that way so these are the things. Even though I'm come from this background, so it's not easy for me to face that world. Every time I have to go by, I go by my own box. I put them in the own box. I be difficult and every day's fight. But being a photographer, artist, or it's easy for me. The tool gives me strength to talk about my pain and the things what I'm facing it, like everyone, like how like like every other artists are talking about their own, like how musicians they talk about songs or art. So same way I also talk about things, and especially I felt like I that I feel like a fish is like, no, that is for me. I found my real voice. Like I this my photograph starts now, because I'm also run away. So this is now I don't want to. I want to. I I accept myself. This is my life. So there is no escape. So I have to face it. I have to talk about it. I should not keep running. So this is the lockdown and the isolation and so many things I looked at, and I felt very stronger. And I'm not shame about who I am. So I'm proud about being who I am. So I like to talk about things. Also, one thing I looked at in Google and things, everywhere there is like, atrocities. People are dying and people are raped, and everywhere there's a sad story. There is also good story. People are like, fighting like their life and put their lifestyle and put them good livelihood, for example. So then I thought this is a good way to talk about my family, and also being a photographer, what is my responsibility. So that way I try to document my own family. So I think I feel like that is very important moment for me to speak about my family history, and what happened throughout in India from my this from this base.
Thank you.
Jaisingh, what about the title, new title, The Fish?
Yeah. So like, first lockdown, I like I've been shooting like, for like I didn't know that I will going to make a work, but that one thing strike me, that people are moving like, all the workers are moving through like that. So that is really disturb me. Then what I'm doing it, I want to go outside. Like I can't do that. Then why every time you have to go outside, like story happening, then what happening in my family, then what is my state of mind during this time. So that is I want to do that. So like then I want to start with that. Then after seventh day, then I looked at, my nephew have a fish tank, and they have a beautiful fish and thing. Then I realized that I felt like that the house become a fish tank. I am the fish. So I felt like that I like a fish. And this also like a very metaphor about caste system and how, like, so many things. And I felt in a way like, that that's how I found that the point. I realized that how, like, I connect with the fish and me, and the question about the my question about current situation.
Thank you, Jaisingh.
So we can, yeah.
Sabih, would you like to ask, or?
Satish? Well, I mean, if you have a pressing question,
I'm just interested in journeys, because Sathish, when he come with me, I'm going for a trek, or he's taking a motorbike and going traveling somewhere. And very often photographers are working on projects which are also very rooted to one place, whereas in case of Sathish there seems to be a freedom. And we were, Sabih and I were talking about accumulation, and Sathish is someone we see accumulating hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of images, each trip that he makes. And I mean, for me, I was curious in terms of how he's pulling seaweed, out of the sea of images in that sense.
Hi, this is Satish. Can you hear me?
yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Sohrab. My work, Town Boy, is a simple work. It's about a boy who moved out from a town and to a city, and how he saw his life and how he explored the world. It's like it's about the boyhood and the movement and the transformation, the overall the life, from my college days to present day. I'm just recording my time through my pictures, and I'm just observing my life, and so it's observation of what's happening, how I am transforming, how I'm learning, meeting new friends, and sometimes I go back to my hometown um, to meet my old friends and spend some time with my family, and keep on moving because in city I'm living in the city. I'm a full-time photographer. Sometime if I get bored or suffocating, I'll just keep move from the city and traveling somewhere with my friends and sometimes to my hometown. Um, um, I'm just observing my life and my time, mm, through my work. Mm, yeah, what's your observation?
Satish,
And
I wanted to ask you that you've been creating this series Town Boy for over a decade now.
yeah,
And so how did this start? Did you know you're going to start a series called Town
no,
Boy before you
no, no.
started journey? At what point did it become a series in your mind that, oh, this is something I will call Town Boy? And now, okay, no, let's hear this maybe, and then I have another question.
Okay, actually, I first of all, I don't plan anything. I just keep on shooting from my college days to till now. Um, mm, I didn't graduate or studied anywhere. I'm just observing and just learning on myself, no self-taught by meeting friends, and I'm just keep on shooting. Um, once after 2011, uh, lots of festivals, photo festivals happening around in India. I went to Delhi Photo Festival and Angkor Photo Festival, and I met new friends, and I'm just learning how the photography world. Because before that I don't know anything about this art world. By year I learned, and I'm keep on simultaneously. I'm just working. It's not planned one. It just came over time. No, my work. At what some point I just go back to my work, what I have shot, um, and just going back to my archive, and then just started scanning my work and showed to my some of my seniors like Sohrab and Danika, and I attended photo workshops. Through that through that process only, I just um, everything, the overall it's a learning process, from 2010 to 2020. Um, that's in this form only. I found my work and myself. Yeah, what I'm doing. I'm just um, um, understanding my meaning, meaning of my life, why I, why I'm taking photographs. I'm just understanding myself, and then in the transformation. Um, um, yeah.
So now that you know that there is a series called Town Boy, so when you
Okay.
go on a journey now, are you conscious that, okay, I want to do this for Town Boy, or I want to do that? Or is it still spontaneous and unplanned as Sohrab was describing?
No, actually, I know I understood what I'm doing, but I don't know what will happen in future. I'm just
Mm,
go with flow.
mm,
It's a go with the flow. It's like a water. I don't know
yeah,
next year what will happen in my
mm,
life.
mm,
That will reflect in my work. That's it.
mm. And so Town Boy continues to keep growing,
Yeah,
keep
sure.
going on
Yeah.
parallel. And do you do other projects side by side with Town Boys? Is every project
No,
enfolded into Town Boys cluster?
actually, my work is not project. I don't fix myself. I'm doing project like that. I'm just working, just shooting what I want to do.
Mhm,
I don't know if the time comes, the other work will split from the town board.
mhm. Got it. Thank you. And this is the question actually I had for others also, for Jaisingh, for Zainab, for Farah, that at least for all of us in this conversation, there seem to be, I mean, I'm using the word projects and Sathish has already thrown that out the window. But for the three of you, are you conscious that you're doing something with the title, you know, with this as a series, and that you're creating a work that is part of this series? Or do you demarcate that, no, this is this series, this is another series? And when you do, whichever way you go about it, how do you plan the next step? So maybe I'll ask Farah first to go, because if everything is a series of experiments growing from one to the other, then one logic of experiments is that you learn from the previous experiment in order to apply it to the next. And so it becomes a cumulative process. So in Farah's practice, maybe you could tell us, how do you, if I may say, choreograph this kind of direction in your experiments, in your projects?
It's pretty much like Satish said. It's quite fluid in the way it progresses. It's just one question leads to another. To be quite honest, like I have never approached my work as a series, because I think the whole body of work is a series, and it's very difficult for me to demarcate one project from the next, because there's always an overspill. I mean, just like listening to sound, the way I record as well changes from one. It's all determined by the eventual moment at that time, you know, the approach. But I've never actually thought of my work as a series.
And so Oral Mirror, for instance, has had multiple iterations, if I'm not wrong. So do you feel that the work is the same in every place it goes? Or do you feel the work also changes because it is, and I don't mean in how it's responding to a space, but in your own programming of the work? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so you do reprogram it, huh?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's always tuned in a manner, not just in terms of the physical space, but also how it's going to be received and perceived. So Oral Mirror, for example, was always shown in a dark space, in a very tiny confined space. And like what we've done at Ishara Art Foundation is that we've opened it up into this huge, well-lit space. So, I mean, every iteration of the work, I think perhaps Oral Mirror could be a series, you know, but every rendition of the work has been different in how it's been projected and perceived.
Understood. Thank you. And Jaisingh, for you, do you think of works as series, and do you plan and choreograph each series, or is it spontaneous, or is there something else altogether?
Yeah, actually, in the beginning I said my all work comes from my accumulation and my childhood experience and things. What I'm doing right now is like, you know, that question happened in 2015, my Anchor workshop. From that Anchor workshop is that my mentors asked me like who you are. Before I've been like, you know, like I'm doing documentary photographer, single pictures and opening films, and I did documentaries, cameras, I did all the works, but I was away from what I want to do, that main core. But 2015, when I was Anchor workshop, they only asked me like, you know, look at yourself, like, you know, go personal things. So that question I was struggling from that 15, and the lockdown I found the answer. So now I ask the same question. For me, my work is everything like a short stories, you know, like feel like if this is a short story. And right now I'm working about my grandmother, it's a short story and everything. So every work have a interlinked. Right now I'm facing a problem, like every work, everything I talk about my problem, my thing. So I'm very careful about, don't want repeat it same again and again. Even in Magnum like fellowship, I'm doing that about my grandmother, and now that is slowly changed to my childhood trauma and things like that. So everything same, but I don't want to repeat again and repeat and again and repeat it. So I'm very careful about it, don't repetition, you know. But everything have interlinked, like, you know, from even Narmada also the question of my grandmother school was demolished. So when I read about Narmada tribes demolished, people are moving from there. So I never been outside of Tamil Nadu. So but when I hear about that, I went there. So there is a small connection about my during my childhood days memories. So there is always some interlinked and also some connection there. So also same, I don't feel like like a now I feel like I move to like a visual media, like music and ad. So I'm believe myself I'm a filmmaker. Maybe one day I'll make a my childhood things, I'll tell it in a good like a 1 hour film. So I'm believe that. So now I'm working on that, so that the documentaries and everything I'm making like a test for myself to become a filmmaker.
I believe you're making a film now. So can we show us a trailer that you've shared with us to everyone? And maybe you can talk a little bit about it. Is that okay, Sohrab?
Yeah, totally. I'm waiting.
Okay. Okay. This, by the way, is the first trailer release ever, right, Sohrab? And right, Jaisingh? What a privilege for us to show this.
There is no audio now, but still in the process, but silent movie now. Yeah.
All right. All right. Okay. Thank you, Jaisingh. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, actually, Chandru sir is a art teacher, and he was the a very prominent artist in Tamil Nadu. Actually, the social consciousness I learned from him only, seeing his work, and so I've been traveling with him last 15 years. So whenever I'm traveling with him, I used to shoot small videos and footage and photographs. So after that, I was editing his footage. I saw that the lot of hand is involving that. So then I realized that he already spoke about art. He already spoke about a lot of written things. So one person is keep working on that, his things, but no need to talk about who he is. But his action is very important, So I thought about the concept, and each frame is like a one journey, one period, So like that I made it, and I thought about it. Also, the trailer I made it for to raise a fundraising for this movie. So because right now I ask anyone give a fund, I want to make a movie, nobody will know that how I'll make it, because nobody believe me. I make a movie, people know me as a photographer. So for to show to people or maybe send to fundraiser, so this is the visualization. Imagine I visual about this movie, about this person. So that is the thought behind it. Also, like a kind of hybrid movie, within a few seconds I want to tell about person, no need to give any explanation or things. So the Tamil people will understand about when his name is come Chandru. So I've been with him. He cut his grandson his haircut. and he works for a carpenter, works everything. So whatever I saw him during that travel with him, so everything I made it like a storyboard, and I shot it. Also, he talks about his poetry like a idadu kaikul mauna paralayam, means the left hand he has a lot of in the left hand he has a lot of things to tell. One of his poetry, idadu kaikul mauna paralayam, means on the left hand the silence delusion or something like that. So from his poetry, from the word I talk it, because all the artists or any poet or even everyone, we have writers, we have a lot of things to tell. We think, and we have our hand is very important. So like from his poetry words I took it and think. So after fellowship I finished, then maybe January, February I'll go to shoot him. Next year, his birthday, I want to release his movie. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Jaisingh. Zainab, can you say a little bit about how you proceed with, say, a work such as The Weight of Snow on Her Chest, because this has already been something going on for over a year. Did you start it like a project? You started with some idea in mind, or has it just grown, evolved, and at some point you decided these come together?
I'd never thought of this work as a project. Because for me, the only thing that I could do sitting at home for 2 years of siege was to photograph. It was initially out of boredom that I was just documenting everything that was around me, the garden of the house, the rooms inside the house, the people inside the house. So it started with that. And for me, the element that kind of how I started to notice things when I was photographing them, like how I started to notice change in it, like the change of seasons, the change of people coming, people going out, people dying. It was all about that. So yeah, for me, like for example, to just look at we have a pomegranate tree in our kitchen garden. So since I've been photographing them through all of these years, I've seen it bloom. I've seen it like when it's all golden in autumn and when the leaves are falling. Then when it has snow on it and a branch breaks every time because of the weight of the snow. So it has been all these things, to notice these small things, then through documenting something so over such a long period of time. It has just been about that.
So how does the process, given how long you've been taking photographs, you're obviously making a selection of sorts, editing out photographs to create a work that you could present as The Weight of Snow on Her Chest. How does that process take place?
So for this one, what Sohrab curated, I had just given him everything that I had. It was a very large edit. So for me, although still there is this tendency to hold back some images. With unfortunately for me, it might sound very vague, but comes from this OCD that I have, that I really don't like tilted frames. Even if I have this OCD of lines that I want everything to be straight and there shouldn't be so much of clutter in the images. And even there is this one picture in the selection, the final selection that is out there. It is of a bird sitting. And then in the background, you have a lot of clutter. There is construction going on and all of that. So when Sohrab selected that image, I told him that I really don't like it because there's a lot of clutter. And then I was told that that is not really how you should be looking at your images, because then he told me what he thought of that image. Like there was this construction and reconstruction in the image, which he could also associate with like his time in Kashmir, how he saw that there is always this process of building things up, or construction can also, how it could be associated with destruction. That is why there is that like something is building up again and all of that. So for me, that image kind of then started to have me thought that I should be letting go.
One clarification is that she didn't just hand over the images to me. She fought for many of the images. So, for example,
she did what?
She fought for quite a few images as well.
Oh, I see. Okay.
mean, what about this image? It wasn't as.
I remember the image with the moon and the cloud. Just a.
You did have your own story, and if you want to share that, and also the title of the work, also, you know, how you kind of came to that. And
so the title was something to kind of behind it. It was, we were having this conversation like what should be the title of the work, because for me, all of the work that I shoot at home, it lies in a folder called Everything Home. There was nothing to it, which obviously didn't make sense. It was just a mark for me to know that this is where all the home images go. So when I talked to Sohrab, we were talking about the title and we hadn't arrived at anything. Then I just sent him the whole text of the work that would go with the work. And I had written about this thing that my grandmother had said in winters, because she was feeling very anxious, and usually in winters, like it's very tough in Kashmir, you don't have electricity for days. And it's like the temperature drops to minus, and it's also very cold, so it's hard to manage in that sense. And my grandmother was just looking through the window, and she was like, she said it in Kashmiri, "मैं शुद्ध लस्कर शिनबाब इकबाल," which means that I can feel the weight of the snow that is there accumulated in the garden on my chest. So that is just how we arrived at the title, because it not only had to do with what she was seeing, it also had to do with how she was feeling at that time, and how like the underlying anxiety of then being in her home for so long, and then even to have been looking at the same garden with the same, for having looked at the same place for so long and nothing is changing. So again, it is about that.
I mean, in the process of working with Zainab, what was amazing was that there was a discovery of actually arriving at something, because we were talking about how the title could actually affect the tone of the work, and we were also very conscious of what are the expectations that others also impose onto whether there is a Kashmiri photographer, or like, you know, the conversation that, I mean, in fact, this is something that Jaisingh himself sort of took the authorship of, where he wrote about how in my community photographers, I'm described as a Dalit photographer, and nobody else is described by, you know,
Based on caste.
that in itself. Um, we were talking about how sometimes we were talking about, for example, even the everydayness of violence, which very often we fail to see as outsiders. We look at violence in terms of events. So for Kashmir, we might relate it to images of stone pelting, images of encounters. They're very important images to have, you know, because I think that they're evidence of some sort of things that have happened. But as outsiders, a lot of us forget that that there is an everydayness to it. So when we were talking, what ended up happening even in the process was that the first attempt was to come at a title. So Zena would have like these titles, you know, and somehow we were not arriving at anything. And then she wrote extremely freely, and the title was within that. In a way, also, Sathish was talking about, you know, his own process of he just goes and does, and somehow then he's able to pull something out rather than thinking beforehand in terms of what it should be, because he's also alive for accidents and mistakes and beautiful mistakes. And similarly with, you know, Zainab, it was about, and I mean, we did watch a lot of films, we watch Abbas Kiarostami, you know, so there was a whole long process in terms of, which was also great for me, because even for me, it was going through a journey with Zainab to try and arrive at something by looking at films, looking at The Taste of Cherry, you know, a film like that, in terms of when you're talking about suicide, and but the title is The Taste of Cherry, how that affects how one looks at suicide, rather than, the entry point that one gives to this film, which is only about that, So those are the kind of conversations that we were having, and Zainab ended up writing this extremely beautiful and powerful sort of short essay about a grandmother, and that's the title was just within that. So this is something even in my own work I've experienced, because I think that because the title is almost like a peg sometimes. Sometimes it's a bit too close. You can have this beautiful, open, rich work, but with the title, you just shut it off completely. And yeah, so thank you, Zainab, for taking me on the journey. And also, actually, it's been a learning experience for me to vicariously learn how to also have the freedom of I mean, it's a bit like how Nadine, who works with Ashara at times, when we were talking about the title of this show, we had a whole range of options where we were which were all touching upon frequency, sound, but it was only for Static in the Air where she took up her hands and she started, this was the gesture, which is more about feeling something all around us rather than just listening. And this is, I think,
being immersed.
in a way, so
That's
I think
fun.
making works very often, photographs that we often kind of, I think, imagine that we are just looking at them because they're visual, whereas there are many other senses that are happening. And I think that when Zainab is writing freely, of course, in the images there's a feeling of weight and isolation, but there's many other layers happening. So the title wasn't to kind of close off those layers, but to kind of, in a way, open it up by making it about a different kind of weight, which is more.
But I'm glad you bring this up, Sohrab, because the kind of process that you describe working closely with Zainab, I've noticed that you shared that with Sathish, with Jaisingh, with Farah as well, in various conversations you've had, even before the first iteration of this exhibition got shaped. And something that is coming out from everyone's brief kind of articulations is that their practice and the works that they're producing somehow have very immersive relationship with those subjects, with the way those works come into being. And it's also showing a strong relationality between, at least Sohrab here being a connecting point between at least the five of us who gathered, although each of us have our own connecting points. But the last question actually I wanted to ask was to Sohrab himself, because we've asked how everyone else relates to clusters, creating series, creating projects, or actually not creating projects. And it's interesting that in today's conversation, at least two speakers, Zainab and Jaisingh, both bring up their grandmothers. And you can see that works are coming out of practically two generations of relationships. And in my view, as we're talking about clusters today, we're actually talking about images that are also relational, that it is not a single image that is finally what you analyze, you experience. The image is not the window anymore. The image may not even be the interface, that single screen that you encounter, you confront. But in fact, the image might be an ensemble of times, of moments, of these immersive experiences and relations that actually then create relations across each other too. So the cluster then becomes actually something that is producing a relationality between images, maybe, or between sounds in Farah's case, or other senses as they intermingle. So what I wanted to ask you, Sohrab, was how do you relate to clusters, accretions, accumulations in your practice, whether it's artistic or editorial, or now even curatorial? What do clusters mean for you? And I remember you having a brief thing to say about the single image in the Chobi Mela conversation you and I were invited to with Munim. But I wonder for you, what is this relationship about with clusters? and accretions and accumulations?
Well, I think it's all about tuning in a way. I think that there are multiple possibilities. I think that all the people here, starting with Farah, who talked about this being one iteration, like she talked about now looking at Oral Mirror as a series, because it's one extraction within the space. And similarly for Sathish, Jaisingh, Zainab, who I hope that all of them, their works build more and more, and then you see different iterations of their works as well. In a way, I think there are these accumulations that are happening, and then we are constantly tuning them. We are amplifying them. We are in a way fading them out, fading them in. In this case, for example, the people fading into a cluster, people fading out, not necessarily out of a cluster, but out within a cluster. And I think it makes me. I mean, in a way, where we are leading to. I'm hoping that at some point I also fade out of uh, this exhibition, and someone else kind of fades in to kind of, and I think we are building towards that, where it's, and I think in some ways I'm also within this larger cluster. So it's like many layers of clusters, and even the single image is a cluster of one, So I wouldn't necessarily separate a single image from a much larger group of images. But I think if I'm able to think of a single image as a series of one, for me, that image can also become a pause rather than a, much more distinct.
But allow me to ask you actually a much more direct question, which is, I mean, the reason I'm asking you this specifically is because I've rarely come across your work, which is just one image somewhere. There's always some connect. So let's get straight to it. What is it? What is it about your way of working which constantly pulls you away from that approach or that ideology of the right moment at the right time is what a photograph is all about?
It's the burden. It's just the burden of photography. I think the historical burden, and I think a lot of us have grown up with, whether it's to do with the form, whether it's to do with certain histories of photography, the decisive moment, what does it really even mean? Who is defining the decisive moment? And I think that the relationship that one has, even in terms of what an image could be, whether it's a single series, I think maybe I'm reacting to an accumulation of what had been handed down to me in terms of what an image was supposed to be. And it was always very close. And I think that's just me reacting to a burden. The reason why I'm still calling a single image as a pause is because I know that at some point I will come back to the single. It's just that at the moment I'm trying to not set, I don't want my work to, because I think that it's like how images, no matter how much we say images are fictional and they can be fictional and so on, but yet you see so many problems that are happening in the world very much due to images, the way they've been circulated.
Images act.
We forget that images are fictional. We react very impulsively, to in a way far more viscerally and impulsively to images, because I think that there is this seed of that baggage which is ingrained into us, including the single. So even, for example, when we are looking at Zainab's cluster here, or say Aishwarya's cluster, because even when I was in conversation with Aishwarya, she never at that time made prints of the work. She's been working on books. That work existed in the form of 3 books at that time, and when we were talking, it was about the movement. So how do we create something which can give someone who's experiencing the work to walk closer to hers or Zainab's or Sean's clusters, because they are sort of, in a body as such, unlike, say, Bunu's cluster, which is visually also marking a series in terms of time, in terms of how one begins from one place and goes to the other. So it's also giving you a direction, whereas in case of Zainab, Ashwarya, Sean, there's no precise direction, but it's more about having the space to invite someone to come closer and to look at maybe these two birds sitting by the door in the end, who are inside, and to again go out and to kind of relate that image, which is a crossover. Because Zeno, for example, has many images that are looking from inside to the out. It is a sort of, because in the show we've also talked so much about portal, we've talked about transference, and there is this constantly, in her images, there is this thing of looking outwards. Or, for example, in Ashwarya's work, there's constantly a connection to animals and, of course, children, but there's also animals and other things which are not as dominant, but they're still quite prominent, So I think that this cluster allows one to see the one image, but also to step back. And I think that, it was more kind of, I think going back and forth, I feel might generate a momentum that might help in someone experiencing the work to also imagine something beyond, like the kind of conversation, like it's about unpacking, right? So the more it's like the more the oscillation, the more the frequency that we are creating, we are in a way, giving space to someone, like in the conversation that we're having around Zainab's, even around waiting, where if she's talking about going and photographing these people who've gone through, the encounter sites, and she's got evidence of, photographs from the kitchen spaces, the more domestic spaces that are destroyed at that moment, and how she's talking about her own sort of waiting and living with that thing of recognizing her privilege, which is also temporary, in that sense, of the home that is still intact. I think that it's these clusters, is this constant, the frequency of going back and forth that gives more space to also unpack into these other sort of, rather than one single fixed image, which will have its own little aura around and its own little spillover around, but it's just.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll take questions for just a few minutes, although we've crossed time. There's one from Himanshu. And just before I ask, if I may add, to me, everything that has been spoken today sounds also like it's a different relationship one has with images and with time, where the relationship with, say, the still image, the fixed image, is now trembling. It is not one image. You use words like oscillating. We have heard today words like journey. We have heard words today like immersive. And all of these you can see are basically untethering the notion of stillness. Everything is trembling, everything is oscillating. And to capture oscillations, you only have to, you can't keep something still. And a still image, therefore, as it breaks out into a cluster, is actually breaking out into vibrations in some sense. There's a question from Himanshu, and I'll just read it out. We'll go on for another 5 to 10 minutes if everyone doesn't mind. And if anyone has questions, please write them. Himanshu asks, when I think about clusters, despite the surface irregularities, there's an underlying subtle mutation. Like a living, breathing organism, it evolves into a growing form. Is Sohrab thinking about the exhibition as a cluster itself? Is the exhibition growing like a tree static in the air also a cluster in and of itself? Sohrab?
Yes, in a way, but I think I'm not consciously thinking of it as a cluster. The exhibition itself, I think maybe cluster is a way to not fix. And I think that in a way, if even growing like a tree was fixed, it would in a way contradict, everything about the forest that we are imagining. The whole idea is that it's not one tree, it's many sort of trees of a much larger forest. And what I'm imagining here is more to do with the velocity and momentum of the exhibition. And I think that having these 6 transformative days helps to kind of, in a way, articulate the momentum, movement, or even a direction away from the first iteration, which could be in any other direction, but also in a way, I feel like it could, in a way, my tree could fade out and someone else's tree could kind of fade in, and that's how I look at it. So of course it's a cluster, but I think that I would say that it's more, I relate it more to, you know, the living, breathing organism that Himanshu is talking about. Not so much the cluster. The cluster for me was more a device within the exhibition, but I think that it's more about, for example, all of them within that cluster of all the sort of panelists here, you know, the 4 of them. I think that it is a living, breathing organism where hopefully, you know, in the next few days, the more changes we might make, even those relationships might change, you know, and maybe there's a new entity, Zainab, who's come in. Maybe there'll be new relationships formed beyond just day one with her. So that's the sort of, I think, device.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think on that note, we don't have more questions. So please allow me to thank you, Sohrab, and all of you, Farah, Zainab, Jaisingh, Sathish. Amazing talking to you. We hope we'll do more activations. Also, at least for the next 5 days, we know who all we're coming together with. So if any of you can join, do join us again. Tomorrow, we're going to have the second transformation. We'll do a brief tour, just like today, of the exhibition, hopefully with no technical glitches, and a conversation with Katrin Koning, Rahi Punyashloka, and Yu Mintan around collapse. We're going to be looking at collapse in a broader sense of narratives collapsing, realities, political scenarios undergoing a collapse, but also one thing collapsing into another. When a room collapses into another, it becomes one room. When a book collapses into an image, it becomes something. So collapsing and collapsing into is something we will look at tomorrow and discuss with the artists. Thank you very much for joining us. And congratulations to all the artists. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.